Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're tackling the causes of World War II. Looks like you've sent over some excerpts from Wikipedia's Causes of World War II and the history article, World War II, Causes and Timeline. So, I guess you're ready to get into it, huh? Really dig deep on this one.
Yeah, it's a huge topic for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. Over 30 countries involved, 6 years of fighting, a level of destruction the world had never seen.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around it, you know?
Yeah, definitely. But the big question that always comes to mind for me is, was it inevitable? Like, was there any way it could have been prevented? That's what I'm hoping we can kind of figure out today.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great place to start, I think. Because looking back, it can seem like this straight line, like it was all just destined to happen. But the truth is, there were so many points along the way where things could have gone differently.
Right, exactly. So I guess a good place to start then would be right after World War I with the Treaty of Versailles. Like, we always hear how that's, cited as a major cause of World War II. But how did a treaty that was supposed to bring peace end up kind of setting the stage for another war?
Well, the treaty had a few big flaws. First, it was really focused on punishing Germany. Like, they got hit with crippling reparations. They had to demilitarize. They lost a bunch of territory. And it just didn't really address the underlying economic and social problems that helped cause the war in the first place.
So it sounds like instead of, trying to rebuild or rehabilitate Germany, it almost fueled resentment.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The German people, they felt humiliated, unfairly blamed, and this created a perfect breeding ground for these extremist ideologies like Nazism, which promised to, restore German pride and power and all that.
And the stab in the back myth really played right into that, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This idea that Germany hadn't been really defeated on the battlefield, but was betrayed by people on the inside, politicians, socialists, Jews. It was powerful propaganda for the Nazis. It shifted blame away from the military, and it created this whole narrative of victimhood that really resonated with a lot of Germans.
So you've got this really volatile situation brewing inside Germany. And then on the global stage, you've got the League of Nations, right? It's supposed to prevent future wars, but it just totally failed to do that. What went wrong?
Well, the League had, it had a noble vision, but didn't really have the power to enforce its decisions. They didn't have a stand-in army, so they had to rely on member nations to cooperate, and, well, they often didn't. Plus, you had major powers, like the U.S. that never even joined.
So it's basically, toothless.
Pretty much, yeah. And this became really obvious in the 1930s, when you had these aggressive powers like Italy and Japan started to flex their muscles. The League, they'd condemn their actions, but they couldn't actually do anything to stop them.
Okay, so let's talk about those aggressive powers then. Italy, Japan, and of course, Germany, they each had their own expansionist agendas, driven by some really, really dangerous ideologies.
Yeah, and it's interesting because those ideologies were kind of linked. They shared a belief in militarism, this glorification of war and military strength, and a particularly aggressive form of nationalism.
So let's start with Germany then. The Nazis, led by Hitler, they were promoting this ideology of racial superiority, the need for living space, what they called Lebensraum. And they were fiercely anti-communist. They were very open about their plans to overturn the Treaty of Versailles, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. They saw the treaty as this unjust humiliation, and their whole campaign was about restoring German greatness, making Germany great again, And Hitler, he laid out his plans in his book, Mein Kampf, which was widely available. His ambitions, they weren't a secret. He was pretty upfront about it.
And it wasn't just talk either. Throughout the 1930s, we see this series of aggressive moves that really start to push Europe towards war. The remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936, for example, that was a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Was that a missed opportunity to stop Hitler?
A lot of historians think so, yeah. I mean, it was a clear test, how far would he go? And when France and Britain didn't really react strongly, it emboldened him, basically showed him that he could get away with breaking the rules.
And then you have the Italian invasion of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, in 1935. Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, he famously warned the League of Nations. He said, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow." And he was right.
Yeah, it's chilling how accurate that turned out to be. The League's response to Italy's aggression was just so weak. It sent this message that these expansionist powers, they could act without consequences. They could do whatever they wanted.
And then at the same time, you've got the Spanish Civil War going on from 1936 to 1939. It kind of became this testing ground for new weapons and tactics. Would you say this was a direct cause of World War II?
I don't know if it was like the direct cause, the thing that, set it all off, but it definitely contributed to the growing tension for sure. And it gave the German and Italian militaries, valuable experience. They got to try out new stuff.
Yeah, I guess it's like each of these events, even though they seem separate, it's like they're all adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. It's all connected. And in Asia, you see a similar pattern with Japan. Their actions are getting more and more aggressive. I mean, they'd already invaded Manchuria back in 1931. And by 1937, they've launched a full-scale invasion of China.
So we've got like rising tensions all over Europe, war breaking out in Asia. It really does feel like everything's about to explode. And this is where the whole idea of appeasement comes in, right? Like Britain and France are just desperate to avoid another war, another huge, devastating war.
Yeah, appeasement was kind of the go-to strategy in the late 1930s. The thinking was, if we just give Hitler a little of what he wants, maybe he'll be satisfied. Maybe we can prevent a bigger conflict.
But looking back, it seems like it just made him more aggressive, like it backfired.
Yeah. I mean, historians still debate that, Some argue that appeasement bought valuable time for Britain and France to, rearm. But others say it just gave Hitler the chance to get stronger, to build up his forces.
Right. Well, let's look at some specific examples. The Anschluss, for instance. When Germany annexed Austria in 1938, there wasn't really much resistance, was there? I mean, was that a turning point?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It showed Hitler that he could expand his territory without any real consequences. And it also showed how divided and hesitant the rest of the world was. Like, nobody wanted to step in.
And then just a few months later, you have the Munich Agreement. Britain, France, Italy, they all agreed to give Hitler Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia. And they didn't even include Czechoslovakia in the negotiations.
Yeah. The Munich Agreement, it's one of the most controversial moments of that whole period. Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, he came back from Munich talking about peace for our time. But less than a year later, war breaks out.
It's kind of sad, actually. Like, they were so desperate for peace that they miss what was really going on.
Yeah. It shows how hard it is to make decisions in those situations. You've got incomplete information, there's a ton of pressure, and you're trying to balance all these different priorities. It's easy to look back and say, oh, they should have done this, they should have done that. But in the moment, it's much more complicated.
So appeasement fails. Hitler breaks the Munich Agreement, and he occupies the rest of Czechoslovakia in 1939. Was that it? Was that the final straw for Britain and France?
It was, yeah. After that, there was no more pretending. Everyone could see that Hitler wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to be satisfied with just a little bit of territory.
And this is where things really start to accelerate. The Danzig crisis, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it all happens so fast.
Exactly. It's like a chain reaction. Yeah. The Danzig crisis, that was all about this city, Danzig, that had been a free city after World War I, but Hitler wanted it back. He wanted to annex it and also get control of the Polish corridor, which separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany.
So this was about more than just land. This was about strategic access, right? Cutting Poland off from the sea.
Right. And Poland, they had guarantees from Britain and France. So they refused to give in to Hitler's demands. They weren't going to back down.
Right.
So it was this standoff, like something had to give.
And then you get this really unexpected twist. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, signed in August of 1939. How did these two regimes that were ideologically opposed to each other, how did they make a deal?
Well, it was all about, practical considerations, realpolitik. Stalin, he was always a pragmatist. He saw this as a chance to grab some territory and also buy himself some time to prepare for, eventual war with Germany. And Hitler, he got to secure his eastern border, which meant he wouldn't have to fight a war on two fronts.
And there was a secret protocol in that pact too, right? They secretly agreed to divide up Eastern Europe.
Yeah, that's right. In this secret protocol, they basically carved up Poland, Finland, the Baltic states, Romania. They decided who would get what.
It's hard to imagine how betrayed those countries must have felt, abandoned by the West and left to be, taken over by these totalitarian regimes.
Yeah, it's a dark chapter for sure. It's a reminder of the human cost of these big power games.
So with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in place, Hitler was basically free to move. And on September 1st, 1939, he invaded Poland.
And that was it. The invasion of Poland, that was the spark. That's what started World War II. Britain and France, they declared war on Germany 2 days later.
And the world was plunged into this massive war, a war that would be even more devastating than World War I.
It really makes you think, you know, about how quickly things can change, how one event can lead to another, and how the choices that leaders make, they can have consequences for generations.
Absolutely. So we've got war raging in Europe, but the United States, at least for now, they're staying out of it. What finally brings America into the war?
Well, one big factor was Japan. They were still expanding in Asia. Remember, they'd already invaded Manchuria, and they were fighting a war in China. And then in 1940, they set their sights on French Indochina, which really worried the U.S.
It's crazy to think, like, all these different events, all these decisions. It's like, if just one thing had gone differently, maybe the whole thing could have been avoided.
Yeah, it's tempting to go down that road, you know, the what-if game.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say for sure. Like, what if the Treaty of Versailles had been less harsh on Germany? Or what if the League of Nations had actually had some teeth?
But, I mean, isn't that the whole point of studying history? To try and learn from the past so we don't repeat the same mistakes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even if we can't change what happened, we can at least try to understand why it happened. You know, figure out what led to the war and what lessons we can apply today.
So, in your view, what are some of those key takeaways? Like, what are the most important things we can learn from all of this?
Well, one thing that really stands out is how dangerous unchecked aggression can be. Like, we saw how appeasement, even though it was meant to prevent war, it actually made things worse. It gave aggressors like Hitler the idea that they could get away with anything.
So it's like you need to show strength, you need to be resolute to deter aggression.
Yeah, but it's not just about military strength either. It's about being strong diplomatically, building alliances, upholding international law. The League of Nations, they were a good idea, but they just weren't powerful enough.
It seems like communication and cooperation are super important too.
Oh yeah, definitely. When countries don't communicate, when there's mistrust, when they misunderstand each other, that's how tensions escalate. And we see that over and over in the lead up to World War II. Diplomacy breaks down, there are miscalculations, nobody really understands what the other side is thinking.
And ideology plays a big role too, right? All those dangerous ideas that the Axis powers were spreading, fascism, Nazism, Japanese imperialism, it's like those ideologies helped push the world towards war.
Yeah, ideologies are powerful. They can motivate people to do great things, but they can also be incredibly destructive. In the case of World War II, those extremist ideologies, they created this whole atmosphere of intolerance, aggression, a willingness to use violence to get what you want.
So we need to understand those ideologies, recognize how dangerous they are.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the past either. It's about being aware of similar ideologies that might pop up today, you know?
Yeah.
Extremism, intolerance, authoritarianism, those are things we always need to be on guard against.
It's a lot to think about. But I think it's also important to remember that even in the midst of all this horror, there were still stories of incredible courage, resilience, and hope. You know, people and countries fighting against tyranny, standing up for freedom and democracy. We can't forget their sacrifices.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
World War II is this huge tragedy, but it also showed the best of humanity. It showed that even when things are at their worst, people can still find the strength to resist, to fight for what's right, to try and build a better world.
So what does all of this mean for our listener? What can they take away from this deep dive into the causes of World War II?
I think the biggest takeaway is just how important it is to understand history, not just as dates and names, but as a way to see how the world works, how our choices have consequences.
Yeah, it's about learning from the past, both the good and the bad, so we can create a better future.
Exactly. And remembering that peace is precious, but it's also fragile. It takes work to maintain it. It takes communication, understanding, and the courage to stand up against injustice.
Well said. I really appreciate you walking us through all of this.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listener, if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to keep digging. There's so much more to discover about this period of history.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the causes of World War II. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning.